This video is sponsored by DistroKid. Follow the VIP link in the description down below to get 7% off an already amazing price to distribute your music to the world. This is Impact XT, a stock virtual instrument which comes with Studio One, and I've used one instance of it to entirely make this little groove. Now, if you've already tried this out and noticed that yours is a drab grey colour, that's easy to fix. Just click on the logo on the top right hand corner here and you can cycle through some colours until you find your favourite. Mine is yellow. You may have also noticed that as each of these samples were playing, let's play a couple now, they have their own channel in my Studio One mixer. We're going to find out about that more advanced stuff a little bit later on, but I think we should start with the basics, yeah? Hi folks, I'm Mike, and I hope you're well. Impact XT is super powerful and not all that complex to use once you know how. I highly recommend that you do watch the whole of this video though, so that you understand it and make it work best for your needs. Let's dive in with the basics. Here in a blank project, I'm going to press F5 on my keyboard to open up the browser, then making sure I've got the Instruments tab selected at the top, I'm going to go down to the Presonus folder, open that, grab Impact and just drag it out into my project. Mine's already yellow because that's the last color I used. Now, if you click on any of the pads here, you may notice that it doesn't make any sound at all. That's because there's no samples loaded yet. Now, one of the best ways to get started with this is to choose a preset. You can get to presets by going up to the top of the plugin here, clicking on this menu here, this drop down menu, and selecting a preset from here. Now, if you don't see many or you don't see any, what I recommend you do is go up to Studio One at the top here, click on that, and then click on Studio One Installation. And when the installation window pops up, in the search box here, I would type in Impact like so, and it's going to filter out the Impact presets you can download here. There's quite a few available. You may see a different list to me because I've already got some installed. So go ahead and select all or some of those and that will get you started. What I'm going to do is go up to the top and select a favorite that I've got here. So I'll just click on favorites, and this one is collective kit. So I'll click on that and that loads up all the samples for that kit. So now if I click on any of the pads, we hear the samples. Now, it's worth remembering that when you go to record a part later, you can't record by clicking on these pads with your mouse. For that, you'll need to use your MIDI keyboard. And also when you do that, you get velocity sensitive sound. So the kick, for example, can be played at different volumes like so. So it's definitely worth doing that. But it may be that you want to create your own kit. Let's have a look at how you can do that. Now, it's certainly true that you can just open up a folder on your operating system, grab sample files and drag them onto pads in Impact in Studio One. But for various reasons, I find that a little bit of a difficult workflow. What I prefer to do is make sure my browser is open in Studio One, go up to the Files tab and then navigate my way to that same folder. It's a bit easier, it just stays open here, and you can do the same thing. You can grab individual samples and just drag them onto pads. Now that in itself can get a little bit tedious because you probably want to choose several samples and put them onto the pads. Let's clear what we've got so far by right clicking on one of the pads and just going down to clear bank. Okay, and I've cleared this whole bank here. What I'm going to do this time is select a samples, let's say a clap one here. I'm going to hold control on my keyboard, it would be command on Mac, select another one, this one's going to be a hi-hat, and I'll select another one, this is going to be a kick. Now I've got to make sure at this point that I hold shift on my keyboard and drag them all across to Impact and drop them there, and you'll see that they all appear on separate pads. This is a really quick way to build a kit. If you don't hold shift when you drag them across, something very different will happen. We're going to discuss that later. Now it's worth noting, actually, because I haven't mentioned it before, that as well as the 16 samples that you can see here, there are several banks that you can choose. So I could grab another bunch of samples, for example here. I'll just select a few in my browser, and again I'll just drag them across and place them on this bank. Okay, so you've got many banks here, each containing 16 pads each with samples on them. Now let's talk about what happens if you don't hold shift when you drag. Now there may be occasions where you want to load several samples onto one pad. This is useful, for example, with velocity sensitive instruments where we have different samples for different velocities, so we can change the character of the instrument as well as making it louder. I don't have an example of that now, so what I'm going to do is just choose some quite different sounding samples so you can really clearly hear what's happening. So I'm going to select the first of my samples here. This is a clap sample. Hold shift on my keyboard and select the last of my clap samples here and just drag them off onto a pad without holding shift this time. So now you know the significance of the shift key. Now I know that I've actually got 11 samples there, because if we go up to the top here, we can see numbers 1 through to 11, and I can actually select each of these samples. Now if I play this particular sample, this pad, using my keyboard, I can trigger different samples with different velocities. So I'll play it very softly. You can see here it's used one sample there, a bit harder. And depending how hard I actually hit the key, I'm getting a different sample being played there. Now I can adjust the cutoff points for the velocities by going up to the top here and just dragging the dividers in between the samples. But it doesn't have to be based upon velocity. I can also select a layer mode over here. It's got velocity selected at the moment, but I could choose, for example, round robin. With round robin, it's just going to cycle through each of the 11 samples here each time I click on my key. So no longer velocity sensitive, but it does play each sample. So that's useful if you've got lots of very similar samples and you want to make sure that you're not playing the same sample again and again. Super useful for hi-hats, for example. The other thing we can do is select random, a bit like round robin, but it's just going to select them in a random order. And finally, we can choose stack. And if we choose stack, it's just going to play all 11 at the same time. So once you've loaded up your samples, you may want to tweak them a little bit. Let's take this one at the top here, Bass Fear E. As you can see, it's quite long, and at the end of the sample, there's quite a lot of dead space. You can set the beginning and end points of your sample just by dragging these little handles here. So I'm happy for it to start right at the start of the sample there, but I want to get rid of this dead space at the end. If I play it now, you'll see it no longer plays this empty area here. I'm going to make this really, really short, like so. And you can see it sort of cuts off rather harshly there. Let's remember that, because I'm going to show you how to tweak and adjust that later so it's not quite so harsh on the ending. Now, some of the other things that we may want to do is, for example, reverse the sample. Just click on the reverse button to do that and play the sample. Handy. You may want to normalize the sample. So if we click on that, you'll see the waveform change just slightly there. It made it a little bit louder, and normalize just makes it as loud as it can possibly go without actually clipping. Moving along over to the right hand side, you'll notice there's a couple of arrows that we can see here. This is really interesting. If I select this clap sample down here, you can see originally I selected it from the folder over here. You see where it says clap neat? That's the actual sample it's using, and you can see that name on the pad. But if we click on these little arrows here, we can cycle through the samples from the folder where we grab that sample. So at the moment it's the clap neat. If I go to the next one, it's clap tape, so on and so forth. This is a really handy way of sort of auditioning samples that you have in a folder. They're all kind of similar. You can just drag one in and then just cycle through different ones until you're happy with the one that you want to use. Moving back up to the area where we can see the waveform again, there's a few things that we can do up here just visually. So we can zoom in and out like so if we need to. We can also sort of change the size of the waveform like so with these controls. Now this doesn't actually change change the sound. This is just a visual change, okay? So if you've got a particularly quiet sort of sample and you want to take a closer look, you can use those controls there. Just over to the right hand side, we can change the color of our pad, which is actually quite handy sometimes. So I'll select a red one there, for example. You can see my clap has turned to red down there. We can change the name. So I'm just going to change this to clap so that it's not clap neat. And then we can also select which notes trigger this sample. So we can select 2 different notes here. Just type in the values of the notes to trigger that pad. The trigger options are super important for our pad's behavior. By default, they're set to 1 shot. You can see that is selected here. And what that means is when we play the note on our keyboard, it's going to play that sample all the way through to the end, unless we press the note again, in which case it will go back to the beginning. So the behavior, if I quickly press my key, and I quickly pressed and released it there, it played all the way through. Now, if I press it and press it quickly again, it goes back to the beginning. Okay, so that's 1 shot. Now, if we change this to loop, we've probably guessed this, as long as I hold down my key, it's going to loop through the sample. And then I release, and it stops. Okay, next we have normal mode. This is, well, the way you'd expect it to behave normally. When you press down on the note, it starts to play the sample. When you release the note, it stops playing. So I can play different lengths of notes in the normal mode. Now, if you select either 1 shot or loop, then this toggle option becomes available. When you've got toggle selected, then your key on your keyboard acts like a kind of an on-off when you press it down. So when you press down the first time, the sample starts to play. When you press down the second time, the sample stops. So 1 press, 2 press. 1 press, 2 press. Okay, so that's a different option. That works with 1 shot as well. Now, sometimes you want one sample on a pad to stop when you play another pad. This is commonly used for hi-hats, where we don't normally want to hear the sound of an open hi-hat at the same time as a closed hi-hat. In this case, I'm going to use it for these 2 organ sounds. So on this pad, we've got this organ sound, and on the second one, this organ sound. Now, if I play them both at the same time, I'll play one and then the other, then we can hear them both at the same time. That's kind of annoying. So what I want to do is choke one when the other one plays. It's very easy to do. Just select the first of the pads that you want to apply this to, go up to choke, and then select a group. So we'll just select group 1, like so, then go to the second pad, and again go up to choke, and again select the same group, so group 1. So because they belong to the same group, they will choke each other. So I can start off by playing 1, but when I play the second one, the first one will stop automatically, like this, or vice versa. So that is choking. Now, in order for the Quantize feature to work in Impact, you have to either be playing or recording in Studio One. And I've switched on my metronome here so you can hear when that's happening, and also what the tempo is as well. So I'm just going to press play. I'm going to muck around with this kick drum. And as you can hear, I can just play it whenever I want to, no matter how bad my timing is. But I can correct it in real time. I'm just going to click on the kick drum first of all and go up to Quantize, and then I'm going to select bars. This means that this kick can only be played at the beginning of each bar. It doesn't matter when I press the key. So when I do press play in my transport, I want you to look at this pad, because it's going to show you when I'm actually pressing the key. Now, I pressed it a couple of times in between each bar, but it only actually played on the bar. Now, that's a broad correction. I would probably set it to something like half beats, and then maybe choose my snare and set that to half beats as well. And then I'll play a little beat. And you'll notice whatever I did there, it played nicely in time. Now, this can become really useful when you've got really long samples. So let's have a look at this organ sample here. Let's play that. Okay, so it's a really long sample. You may want to make sure that when you trigger it, it starts right at the beginning of a bar. So I will select bars for that. And you'll also probably want to make sure it follows the tempo of your song. So I'm going to click on follow tempo, we'll press play, and we'll see what happens. So I pressed it really early, but it didn't start till the beginning of the bar, and it played in time with the tempo of the song. So earlier we saw that we can determine where we start and finish playing the sample with these handles down here. So that's the start and that is the end there. Now we also have an offset control down here. So we can determine an offset start here, and then we can offset the end as well. Now these are relational, not to the beginning of the sample, but to the handles that we set earlier. So if I was to move this handle in here and then do a little offset of say 200 milliseconds and play the sample, you'll see it starts around about here. Yep. So it's no longer starting here. If I push this back out down here and then play the note again, you'll see it's offset from that handle there. Okay, now I wondered for a while kind of what the point of this was, and I've noticed it comes into play when we are using the loop feature. So if I set this to a loop and I set my handle up here just to make it nice and short, I'll just reset the start and the end, play this. Yeah, you can see it just loops around that area as we'd expect. Now if I start from say 200 or so milliseconds, you'll notice it starts a little later, but look what happens when it loops. So it initially starts from the middle, but when it loops back, it goes back to the beginning. That's the main thing that I've noticed about these offsets. Okay, so let's adjust the pitch of our sample. I've got my very deep bass note here. Have a listen. And I want to make it 1 octave higher. So I'll go to the pitch control over here and I'll just adjust that to 12. So it's a whole octave higher. Have a listen. Yeah, and I can do some fine tuning if I want to with the pitch here as well. Now we get some fun controls with the velocity to begin with. If we go over to the velocity control over here and push it up and I play the note, you'll hear it's much, much higher, but it depends how hard I play that note as to how high it is. So I'll do a soft note. And you can hear all of the other notes in between the harder I press my key on my keyboard. So that's pitch according to velocity. And then we've got an envelope that we can set. So if we just push the envelope control up a little bit and I play my note, you'll hear it's much, much higher, yeah? And we're not hearing a transition from our original note to our new note because the attack is set to its minimum. If I push the attack up a little bit to say 100 milliseconds, then we hear that transition from our original note up to the new note, which is set by the envelope control. We've also got decay, sustain, release controls here, which I will let you play with. Now it's worth noting that these controls are only available when we have a normal trigger, a loop, or a loop trigger. It's not available on one shot because obviously one shot it plays all the way through to the end anyway, so release is not too important. So once you understand the ADSR, envelope, and velocity controls in the pitch functions here, it really helps you to understand what they do in the filter section. Rather than controlling pitch here, they're controlling the behavior of the filter. So we switch the filter on by clicking on this little button here, and the main two controls we're going to adjust to begin with are our cutoff frequency and our resonance. So let's just play around with those. Okay, I'm liking that sound. By the way, I can choose different types of filters down here. Let's just try a different one here. Yep, that's nice enough. We can add some drive. And punch, which I can't always hear, but it adds a sort of a percussive element to the beginning. And also we can choose between two different types of analog modeled processing here to get a slightly different sound. So we can switch soft on here. Very slightly different sound there. So ADSR is going to work on the filter here. Again, we need to push the attack up to sort of start to hear the transition between the beginning and the ending point. I'll push up the envelope so we can set a modulation amount here. Now I'll play my note. Yeah. And you can hear how it's adjusting the filter there. We can also adjust according to velocity, just like we did with pitch. Hopefully the gain control in the amp section speaks for itself. It's a volume control to make the sample louder or quieter. Next to that, we also have a pan control to send it more to the left or more to the right. Now we can also control the gain or the amplitude throughout the playing of the actual sample with the ADSR controls. So if I wanted it to gradually fade in, I could push the attack time up like so, and when I play my note, it will sound like this. And if you remember, with this sample, when I play and release it, it sort of suddenly stops, doesn't it, like this. But I can have a soft ending to that, a slow ending, by adjusting the release control. Push that up and I'll play a note and release. Yeah, I could even push it up further than that. Let's try again. That's got a nice natural feeling to it. I'll let you play with the decay and sustain controls there, but that's how you can adjust the way that the gain behaves throughout the playing of the sample. Now finally, we have this velocity control over here for gain. So it's on full at the moment and it's been playing those softer and louder notes as we'd expect. But if we turn this all the way down, then it means that the sound won't be, or the volume won't be affected by how hard we play the note on our keyboard. It'll always be at the same volume. So no matter what I do, it's always at that same volume. Now, when you're editing your samples, one little feature which is quite useful is this pad focus up here. If I actually click on a pad with my mouse, you'll notice it has this sort of semi-permanent line around the edge. So we can see which one we are editing at the top and on the right-hand side. But if I play on my keyboard, it doesn't change the focus yet. It's just staying on this particular pad. So we can change that behavior by clicking on the pad focus up here. So whatever the last note is that we played on our keyboard will be the note that we're editing over here. Now, before I show you how to create those multiple outputs that we saw at the beginning of the video, I just want to remind you, if you're releasing your music to places like Spotify, Apple Music, Amazon, Google Play, etc., check the link in the description down below for our sponsor DistroKid. If you follow that link, you'll get 7% off your first year of membership. So you'll notice that I've got my little kit set up here, but all of the sounds are going through one channel in my mix area here in Studio One. And you can see, if you look at the bottom right hand corner of each pad, that it's got the number 1 there at the moment. That is indicating which output channel from Impact this sound is being routed through. So we can change that. So let's say I want my snare to go through a separate channel. I'll just click on that number 1. It pulls up this dialog and I can choose either a stereo or mono output. Now, if you look at the actual sample for my snare, you'll notice it's a mono sample. So it makes sense to create a mono output for that snare. So I'll just click mono there. And then if I click on that, you'll see that just that snare is coming out of this new channel which has appeared here. Okay, I could go ahead and rename that to snare. I could perhaps match the color of it if I wanted to. This is really useful, not only because it's easier to sort of mix a kit from your mixer in Studio One, but also because you can apply different effects now to different sounds coming from Impact. So that's super useful. Now, if you want to disable or enable any of these outputs, you can just go up to the top here, click on this little icon. You can see all of your outputs, and then you can just use the checkboxes here to enable or disable them. So before you go, I'd like to mention there's a brand new way to support this channel apart from commenting, liking and subscribing. If you click on the join button down below and become a member, you can help to make this channel and community much more sustainable for the future. Now, the perks are mostly fun with badges and emojis and things, but there's also some useful things like getting early access to some videos. So before you watch one of these 2 videos, which I highly recommend, consider clicking on the join button down below. I'd appreciate it so much, and I'll see you in the next video.